Good evening. It's Wednesday, the 7th of February. Our top stories tonight. Hopes of a new ceasefire plan for Gaza after Hamas responds to a proposal for a pause in fighting. A legal blow for Donald Trump as the court rejects his claim of immunity from criminal charges. The mother of a US school shooter convicted of manslaughter in a landmark trial. And an initial report finds 4 bolts were missing from a door that fell from a Boeing plane last month. You're watching The World. Hello, I'm Beverley O'Connor. Later, as Indonesians prepare to go to the polls in a week's time, a political dynasty seems set to win the day. Well, more details are emerging of Hamas's response to a ceasefire framework put forward by Qatari and Egyptian mediators. Reuters is reporting that Hamas has proposed a 3-stage ceasefire, outlining the exchange of remaining Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, the reconstruction of Gaza and the withdrawal of Israeli forces. The US has declined to discuss details of the proposal, but Secretary of State Antony Blinken said it had been shared with and would be discussed with Israeli officials.
A glimmer of hope after 4 gruelling months. Hamas militants react to a proposal to once again pause fighting in the Gaza Strip.
The response includes some comments on the framework, but in its entirety, it is a positive response.
While those involved are not saying much, US President Joe Biden says the demands are being considered.
It seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
The deal, put together by Israel, the US, Qatar and Egypt, is believed to include a 6-week truce and another exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. It can't come any sooner for Israelis being held captive by Hamas. The IDF has confirmed that 136 hostages remain, with fears that as many as 31 are dead.
The proposal for a ceasefire was sent to Hamas a week ago. It's believed to include a demand that Israel releases thousands of Palestinian prisoners in return for the hostages, a demand that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has previously ruled out.
In Jerusalem, protesters picket the office of the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Israel alleges UNRWA workers were involved in the October 7 attacks. The UN has launched an internal and external investigation. But a probe by Britain's Channel 4 has found no evidence of the claims that led to a tranche of countries, including Australia, withdrawing funds.
What we need to see from UNRWA now is transparent leadership in respect of their activities.
In Rafah, Israel is ramping up its assault. Gaza's southernmost city is home to hundreds of thousands of displaced people. Desperately hoping an end to this conflict is finally in sight. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
A US appeals court has found Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity in a landmark legal case in New York. The ruling means he can be prosecuted on charges of plotting to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Mr. Trump had claimed he was immune from charges for acts he said fell within his duties as president, and it brings him a step closer to a criminal trial. The case, though, has now been paused until at least next week to give Mr. Trump's legal team time to appeal to the US Supreme Court. We'll have more on this decision with a constitutional law expert shortly. Well, after 11 hours of deliberations, the mother of an American teenager who shot dead 4 of his classmates has been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors in the first of its kind trial argued that she and her husband failed to prevent the shooting by giving their son a gun and ignoring warning signs.
A mother found guilty 2 years after her child's violent crimes. Jennifer Crumbly was convicted of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 for every student shot dead by her son.
It was a long time coming, but it's definitely a step toward the accountability like what we've been talking about. It's kind of been our goal the whole time.
Ethan Crumbly has already been sentenced to life in prison for killing his classmates when he was 15 years old. Prosecutors alleged he'd received the gun as a Christmas present from his parents. But when they were called to the school hours before the shooting to discuss a violent drawing he'd done, they didn't take him home or reveal that he'd been given a weapon.
There's a lot of stuff that could have easily thwarted this whole thing. It could have been stopped very easily.
This case is believed to be the first time that a parent in the US has been convicted of such serious offences over a mass shooting carried out by their child. And while gun control advocates hope it sends a warning to other parents, there's also some concern about the precedent it could set.
I understand why a prosecutor would want to try it. I mean, you know, I have children too, and it's terrifying when we drop them off to school. We think they're safe. On the other hand, there's this kind of moral intuition that at some point you can't be responsible for somebody else's behaviour.
Ethan Crumbly's father, James Crumbly, is facing the same involuntary manslaughter charges and will go to trial next month. Jade McMillan, ABC News.
24 people have been killed in twin bombings in Pakistan ahead of the country's parliamentary election. 10 of them died in an attack near the office of a religious party, which authorities say has been targeted by militants before. The other bomb killed 14 people at the office of an independent candidate. More than 24 people have been injured there. The election is scheduled for tomorrow. Chile's president has declared 3 days of mourning for former leader Sebastián Piñera, who died in a helicopter crash. Police recovered his body from a lake in the country's south. The news has drawn both sympathy and anger for a president that was lauded for his economic record, but criticised for a failure to tackle deep inequality. Demonstrators gathered in the city of Santiago, throwing stones at police before officers broke up the crowd with gas. Others signed condolences for Mr. Piñera at his party's headquarters.
From his vision, President Piñera contributed to building great treaties for the country's well-being. He was always a Democrat, and he genuinely sought what he thought was the best for the country.
We're still really sad. One of my sisters loved him a lot. My family is not affiliated with any political parties, but we can see when people do a good job and when they don't.
The only legacy he left behind was hate and more division than before. He declared war on the people.
Investigators say that a door that flew off a Boeing 737 MAX shortly after takeoff last month was missing 4 key bolts. The US Transportation Safety Board says the bolts, which are meant to lock the unused door to the fuselage, appear to be missing. The preliminary findings provide the first official look into what happened after the Alaska Airlines flight took off. Thankfully, the plane made an emergency landing and all 177 people on board escaped with no major injuries. The Federal Aviation Administration says it will hold Boeing accountable for any safety violations.
We've begun an audit of Boeing's production and quality control practices, and we've informed Boeing that the FAA will not grant any production expansion of the MAX until we're satisfied the quality control issues uncovered during this process are resolved.
King Charles has been seen in public for the first time since his shock cancer diagnosis. The news triggered a flood of well-wishers, as well as a reunion with his estranged son, Prince Harry. Some royal watchers say this diagnosis might help the family heal their well-publicised rift.
The King spotted for the first time since announcing his cancer battle, and he was all smiles. The 75-year-old and his wife waved to onlookers outside Buckingham Palace. All eyes were on the royal reunion. Prince Harry landed in London after learning of his dad's diagnosis, the Duke of Sussex arriving at his father's residence alone and leaving less than an hour later. It's the first time the pair is believed to have met since the coronation in May, but it's understood he has no plans to see his brother, Prince William.
This whole family feud seems a bit silly in my opinion. They should make up and hopefully this brings them together a little bit more.
Many families have grim diagnoses of horrible diseases and what tends to happen is that, you know, you park the minor grievances and get on with the big stuff. So I think he'd be delighted that he's got both of his sons back on home soil.
Other royals were stepping up.
Your Royal Highness, how is the King?
Princess Anne attending multiple public events in England. While well-wishers poured in from around the world, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reassured the public he's in regular contact with the King and revealed he caught his cancer in the early stages.
Obviously, like everyone else, shocked and sad, and just all our thoughts are with him and his family. And, thankfully, this has been caught early.
There's been no further updates from the palace on the King's health, and it's expected that from this point forward, many details of his treatment and recovery will be kept private. Charles and Camilla left London for their Sandringham estate in the countryside, where the King can get peace and privacy between treatments. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, London.
Fiji's former Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama has appeared in court on one charge of abuse of office after spending the night in police custody. He appeared alongside his former Attorney General and the country's former Health Minister. They're accused of failing to follow proper procedures regarding a tender bid for hospital engineering services, an offence which is believed to have happened more than a decade ago. The ABC's Fiji reporter Lethe Mavono says today's bail hearing went fairly smoothly despite prosecutors' attempts to impose strict bail conditions.
The three gentlemen appeared in court today to face 7 counts of corruption charges between them in front of Chief Magistrate Walin George. It was really quite a run-of-the-mill bail hearing. All 3 of them were released on bail today. There was an attempt by the state prosecutors to enforce strict bail conditions on the 3 gentlemen, but the court was not having any of it, saying that they haven't had any problems in the past. Because, as you know, the former Attorney General Aya Said Qayyum did leave the country in the middle of other unrelated charges that he is facing, and he left the country and came right back. And so they're out on bail, and the bail conditions, the only unusual thing about the bail conditions is that state prosecutors asked for cash bail bonds for the 3 gentlemen, given that the tenders in question in this alleged offense is worth about $1 million Fijian dollars. So they're out on bail and they're expected back in court on the 19th of March.
Yeah, so what was the atmosphere like? Was it sort of, here we go again?
That's right. It did feel like that. It was quite a pleasant atmosphere for, given the magnitude and the seriousness of what was happening. It's the same people, the usual people. And given that the Fiji police force and other authorities had indicated last year that there were other lines of investigations into both the gentlemen, there wasn't too much of a shock. There was still a lot of people, however, there to support the gentlemen. And when they came out, there was quite a feeling that this was not something serious or urgent.
Yeah. So then how is this case likely to play out regarding the charges that they are facing?
Well, the 3 gentlemen will appear again on the 19th, and that is most likely a plea hearing or just to hear the evidence that is available against them. But they do also have to choose the court in which they would like their case tried. Just like last time, they're likely to choose a magistrate's court, given that the penalties that can be given by the magistrates are less severe than in a high court, for example. But the abuse of office charge is quite a serious one, and it does carry a high penalty. Obstruction of justice, which the former Attorney General Aya Said Qayyum will answer to, that is also quite serious. But a lot remains to be seen. However, on the part of the public prosecutors, who I did have a word with today, they are prepared to try this case.
Yeah. What impact do you think, Lethe, is this going to have on the political climate in Fiji?
Well, right now, it's something that's not a surprise to people, but Frank Bainimarama and Aya Said Qayyum were very popular when they were in power. In the last elections, they did, between the 2 of them, pull more than 50% of the votes cast. So they're quite important people, and a lot of those people are of the view that this is nothing more than a political witch hunt. And it was definitely something that the former Attorney General said when he came out of court today, Beverley. The
government needs instruction. The economy is not doing well. Massive amounts of Fijians are leaving. There's general dissatisfaction with the cost of living going up. General dissatisfaction, obviously, in terms of how the country is being governed, vis-a-vis the very what we call weak coalition government, all those sorts of dramas that's taking place within the government.
And so now it's another year of watching abuse of office charges against the former Prime Minister and 2 other of his former ministers now, Bev.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on it as always. Good to have you on. Thanks, Lethe.
Binaka.
At least 11 people have been killed and dozens injured after a blast ripped through a firecracker factory in central India. Nearly 175 people were rushed to hospital as authorities determine the cause of the accident in the Madhya Pradesh state. Smoke billowed from the debris and officials raced to extricate people trapped inside. Former Star Wars actress Gina Carano is suing Disney-owned studio Lucasfilm for wrongful termination and sex discrimination with the backing of the social media platform X. Ms. Carano alleges she was fired in 2021 for posting right-wing opinions on social media where she discussed COVID mask mandates, election fraud and Jewish people in the Holocaust. Lucasfilm said Ms. Carano's posts denigrated people based on their cultural or religious identities and were abhorrent and unacceptable. X says it is proud to empower her to seek vindication of her free speech rights on the platform. X corporation owner Elon Musk had previously committed to funding lawsuits of this nature. Workers could soon be given the right to disconnect from the office and ignore phone calls and emails after hours. The federal parliament appears set to pass new laws granting a right to switch off as part of a broader package of industrial relations reforms.
It's a phone call that can ruin a weekend.
Hello?
And soon, workers will have the right to simply ignore it.
Millions of Australian workers give their time unpaid through their phone or their computer on weekends and outside their paid working time.
Federal Parliament looks set to pass new laws creating a right to disconnect.
What we're simply saying is that someone who's not being paid 24 hours a day shouldn't be penalised if they're not online and available 24 hours a day.
It means that you have the right to refuse to be contacted where it is unreasonable in relation to your work outside your working time.
The new laws will be fairly simple. Employers will still have the right to contact their staff out of work hours, be it via email, text or phone. But workers will have the right to simply ignore it and can't be punished for doing so. The rules recognise there can be good reasons for employers getting in touch, like shift changes or work emergencies. When disputes happen, they will ultimately be decided by the Fair Work Commission.
I think this is really, a triumph of stupidity over common sense.
Business groups and the opposition warn the rules could threaten flexibility in the workplace.
If we're genuine about flexible workplaces, if we're genuine about allowing people to take time off to go and pick up their kids from school, for instance, well then I think we've got to have sensible conversations about what rights and obligations exist.
This wasn't the government's idea. It's something the Greens negotiated into a broader IR package. It includes things like changing the way casual work is defined to better reflect a worker's actual shift patterns and setting minimum standards for gig workers, like a base rate of pay for Uber drivers and food delivery riders. Those are bigger government priorities, but a right to disconnect is something it was happy to add on. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
Parts of Brazil have declared a health emergency over a surge in cases of the mosquito-borne dengue virus. The state of Rio de Janeiro has deployed teams to vacuum and test mosquitoes for infections after reporting cases of the type 3 strain for the first time since 2002. Dengue cases were 4 times higher last month than January 2023. Authorities are expecting the variant to affect a large portion of the population. Most people with dengue don't have symptoms, but the infection can be severe, painful and sometimes even fatal.
So what we're doing is monitoring the mosquitoes and collecting them, as was done in the collections you recorded. There we can identify in advance whether the mosquitoes are infected and with what kind of virus.
Well, let's return to Donald Trump's legal woes. In addition to today's ruling on immunity, he could be facing disqualification from this year's election, as the US Supreme Court will start considering a highly anticipated case over his role in the 2021 Capitol riots. Lynn Rambo is Professor Emerita of Law at Texas A&M University. Lynn, great to see you as always. Such a fascinating day. Let's start with today's events. A setback with the appeals court ruling that he wasn't going to be immune from these charges. These charges, of course, relate to the January 6th riot.
Right. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals found 3-0 that he was not immune from criminal prosecution for acts he took.
Yeah. So can he appeal this? Or it does seem to have helped his cause to delay things as much as possible.
It certainly has done that, and he almost certainly will appeal to the full Supreme Court. And how quickly they'll take that up is uncertain, and that postpones the federal trial on the charges of insurrection brought by Special Counsel Jack Smith.
Yeah.
So it's good that the decision came out in terms of moving the trial along, but there are further stages to go.
Indeed. All right, let's come to this Colorado case with the Supreme Court hearing arguments today surrounding his eligibility to be on the ballot. Take us through what's happened and what the arguments here are.
Okay, well, basically, as part of the 14th Amendment, there is Section 3. And the 14th Amendment, was enacted and ratified after the Civil War. And Section 3 prohibits anyone from holding, it's a little convoluted, anyone from holding federal public office, I'll just group the offices together that way, who has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and then participated in an insurrection. And so voters, a variety of different people, have brought challenges all across the United States. 35 different states have challenges against Trump being on the ballot based on this provision that he participated in an insurrection. So the Colorado voters in Colorado brought a case in in state district court in Colorado to disqualify him. And the trial court found that he had participated in an insurrection and that all of the other prohibitions of Section 3 were met, except that he was not an officer of the United States, as that term is used. That went up to the Colorado Supreme Court, and the Colorado Supreme Court reversed the part about the officer of the United States and essentially disqualified him from being on the Colorado ballot. Then they stayed their own opinion, assuming that he would take it to the United States Supreme Court, and that's exactly what he did, and that's what's being heard Thursday.
Yeah. So give us a sense of how the Supreme Court is going to go about hearing this argument. He, of course, says this rule doesn't apply to him. Will they be looking at that, or are they just looking at sort of the basics of law here?
Well, that's a great question. I think that the starting place for considering this is realizing that this part of the Constitution has not been litigated at all before. Well, I mean, there are a sprinkle of cases, but it hasn't been up at the United States Supreme Court. So there are, and if you look at the Colorado Supreme Court decision, it's over 100 pages long. There are multiple issues. So one of the issues they're going to look at is whether it applies to the presidency, but there are a vast number, okay, I'm saying vast, there are 5 or 6 other issues involved in the case. And there's this overarching issue about the effect on the separation of powers for the Supreme Court to sort of step in and take somebody out of the ballot who may be the preference of a sizable number of the American population.
And that is so fascinating because, of course, this is a highly conservative court. A third of this court was appointed by Trump. So what is your sense as to whether that's going to come into their considerations?
Well, notwithstanding that he appointed 3 of these justices, the court has not acted enormously in his favor on a variety of things. I mean, there have been cases where you would, if you expected a knee-jerk reaction from the 3 appointees, you did not get it. They have not been afraid to go against him, as it were. That said, It is a conservative court. And quite honestly, I think any court, any Supreme Court would tread very lightly in this situation because of the anti-democratic effects it has, and also because it's going to be creating new law to begin with. So the sort of two steps of doing something to take out a candidate and doing it in the interpretation where they're not bound, it's not as though they're bound by precedent to have to go in that direction. I would be very, very surprised if they would uphold the Colorado decision.
Yeah. So, and then, Lynn, if they don't uphold the Colorado decision, does that kind of throw out the rest of the states that are considering similar action, taking him off the ballot?
It really depends on what they find. There's so much room for their decision to go in different directions that it's a little bit hard to predict what effect that would have on challenges elsewhere. It's a little easier to predict if they were to uphold it.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I know you probably wouldn't take on his cases, but if you were his lawyer, would you want him in court for this Supreme Court hearing?
Oh, what a fascinating question. No.
He hasn't helped himself in other cases, has he?
Right. You notice I didn't add a lot after the no. I was going to say something about he doesn't play in the sandbox well, but suffice it to say that's probably enough to say why I would say no.
Yeah, and then hope he'd listen to you, because he doesn't always do that either. To his lawyers.
There's that.
Yeah, there's that. Look, before we let you go, a really interesting case today with the mother of a 15-year-old boy who shot dead 4 of his classmates has been found guilty of manslaughter. What did you make of this case, and how concerned would you be that it could establish some form of precedent to hold parents responsible?
Well, it's new. I mean, this hasn't been done much. You know, I clerked for a judge once that told me that every case was about the facts. And so I'm not that worried that it would create a dangerous precedent, because the facts in this case are so incredibly egregious. It is extremely difficult to imagine a parent-child situation where they were more negligent, more reckless about dealing with a child. I mean, these parents, I believe they bought him the gun. And the failure to act when school officials, you know, alerted them is just, it's pretty horrifying. So I think there's, you know, reason to say this is precedent for going in a new path, but the facts are egregious enough that I'm not sure I worry about its abuse.
Yeah, that it would be repeated. Yeah, it was quite remarkable. And she said in court that she wouldn't do anything differently, which was also quite astounding to hear, really. Always good to have you, and thanks for getting up so early for us. Much appreciated.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lynn. A warning for die-hard Taylor Swift fans. Victoria Police says ticket scams for the pop star's upcoming Melbourne shows are running rampant. Police say they've received at least 250 reports of ticketing scams linked to the concert since July last year. People who've been caught up in them have mostly been targeted through social media. All up, they've lost more than $260,000. And in a bid to prevent a practice known as Taylorgating, the MCG is urging superfans who didn't manage to get tickets to steer well clear of the venue on all 3 concert nights.
Arrangements are being put in place to ensure that for people who are going to the concert can move in and out of the MCG in a safe way, but also too for those who may be around the venue to ensure that is managed in an appropriately safe way.
1 person has been killed and 2 more have been injured in a rare hyena attack near Kenya's capital. The wild hyenas killed and dismembered a Nairobi man, Anthony Pasha, who was collecting firewood near his home. His brother heard screams from a university student who was also being attacked but didn't realise his brother was at risk. Mr Pasha's brother and the student are in hospital, one in critical condition.
We want this family to get help. Everything has been killed in this homestead. Cows were killed, goats, and now it's people. We haven't found any part of the deceased. We've not been given any help. The other 2 injured victims have been admitted to the hospital. We haven't been offered any help from the authorities. How long must we suffer?
Former rebel leader Guy Philippe has been spotted in Haiti's capital after calling for protests against the country's leader. Protesters and politicians demonstrated for a second straight day, demanding Prime Minister Ariel Henry resign. Mr Henry has led Haiti since his successor was assassinated in 2021. Mr Philippe had called for the protests on Monday and says he'll be out on the streets with his people today. Our top stories tonight. There are reports that Hamas has proposed a 3-stage ceasefire outlining the exchange of the remaining Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, the reconstruction of Gaza and the withdrawal of Israeli forces. A US appeals court has ruled Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity, meaning he can be prosecuted on charges of plotting to overturn his 2020 election defeat. And 24 people have been killed, with more injured in twin bombings ahead of Pakistan's election. At least 2 people have been killed by Russian strikes in Ukraine's capital. The country was under air raid alert from 6 a.m. when Russia launched attacks on Kiev and other cities. Air defence systems shot down more than 40 of the 64 missiles and drones Russia launched, but falling debris cut power to parts of the capital. Many people in Kiev took shelter in the city's underground subway system. Well, Indonesia is going to go to the polls next week to decide on who will replace outgoing President Joko Widodo, who has served the maximum of 2 terms. ABC's Jakarta Bureau Chief Bill Birtle says despite there being 3 candidates in the running, victory is all but assured for one, the current Defence Minister and former military strongman Prabowo Subianto, who is well ahead in the polls.
3 men contesting the presidential election. The first one will be very familiar to anyone who's spent any time at all paying attention to Indonesian politics over the past 15 years. Prabowo Subianto. He is in his 4th straight election. He ran for vice president in 2009. He contested the last 2 elections going for the top job, and he lost all of them. He has never won. He's 72 now. He survived a mild stroke, but it did affect his health a little bit. Yet despite all that, he is persistent. He's now running again, and this time he's an almost certain bet to win the election on February 14. And it's partly because, with his incredibly controversial past, many of the first-time voters and young voters who are under sort of 30 or maybe 35, they don't really have a great deal of, memory or understanding about the controversies that have long dogged Prabowo, such as his time in the military, where he is accused of human rights abuses in East Timor, accused of abuses in Papua, but probably most infamous, he's accused of being involved in the kidnapping of 22 pro-democracy activists in the late 1990s as the Suharto regime was crumbling. Of those 22, 13 were never found and they're presumed dead. So despite that, all these years later, Prabowo Subianto is the front runner to win. And the other reason he is now suddenly a lot more popular is because he's chosen as his vice presidential running mate the son of the current president, Joko Widodo. His son's name is Gibran Rakabuming Raka. And because the outgoing president, Joko Widodo, is still really popular after 10 years in office, he's able to transfer that popularity to his son. Many of the supporters of Joko Widodo, who just really, really are loyal to him, they're going to vote for Prabowo because they're happy to see that the president, the outgoing president's legacy, will continue on through his flesh and blood as the VP. Just quickly, Bev, the other 2 candidates, Ganjar Pranowo, the Silver Fox, he is running as as well as Anies Baswedan. Ganjar is a governor in central Java. Anies Baswedan used to be the governor of Jakarta, but the reason I'm not spending a great deal of time talking about them is both of them are well back in the polls, and no one is expecting that either of them have a chance of beating Prabowo on February 14.
Yeah, and it's a surprise, of course, that Jokowi has given his imprimatur to Prabowo. As you point out, his son is on the ticket. Despite the odds, he's too young to necessarily be there, but he got on the ticket. How much of a factor is he playing in with the younger voters, as you point out, who don't have a lot of memory of elections gone by and potentially, you know, some of what has happened?
Well, I don't even know if Gibran is the key guy helping to win the younger vote. That's certainly the hope of Prabowo, but going to some of these Prabowo rallies where both him and Gibran Rakabuming Raka are present, you speak to people who are sort of, you know, in their 30s or their 40s, and they just go, oh, I love Jokowi, I love Joko Widodo, I really love him. That's why I'm voting for Prabowo, because of his son Gibran. It's all because of Jokowi. I will follow Jokowi whatever he wants, and very obviously Jokowi is endorsing Prabowo because he's given his son to him, basically. So for this reason, I'm not so sure if the Gibran factor is pulling in young voters, or if it's kind of pulling in voters generally across all age brackets who think that Joko Widodo has done a good job over the past decade. But certainly young voters under 40 are the majority bloc, particularly under 30. There is a huge surge of young voters for this election, and all the candidates are trying to court them. Ganjar Pranowo and his running mate Mahfoud MD, they turn up to all the debates wearing these sort of silly bomber jackets with cutesy little logos and stuff all over them. Doesn't seem to be working. Anies Baswedan, he's done a lot of sort of K-pop style campaigning with some of his live videos. Some of his fans have given him a K-pop nickname. You can see what they're trying to do, but the gimmicks don't seem to really be luring those younger voters over. One gimmick, though, that may be working is that Prabowo and Gibran have had a makeover, and although Prabowo is a sort of hard former military man accused of human rights abuses, this time around they've kind of done him up in this cutesy aesthetic called Gemoy, where he's kind of cartoonish, portrayed as cartoonish and cute and pudgy, and these weird posters are all over the cities in Indonesia showing this 72-year-old man with allegedly a very dark past being portrayed as this sort of cuddly, almost like a little boy. It's weird, Bev, but as the polls show, seems to be working.
Seems to be working. So when you talk about issues of concern for people going into an election, it seems, as you're pointing out, that people have been very happy with the job Jokowi has done. So, you know, are there issues that they feel should be done differently? Are there going to be any problems that this new ticket could run into?
Yeah, that's what makes this election, I have to say, a little bit underwhelming, because Prabowo's whole campaigning ethos is continuity. I'm just going to keep doing what Joko Widodo has done for the past decade. Look, I've got his son on my ticket. There's your guarantee that if you like the direction Indonesia's going in, you're going to get more of it under my leadership. That is the Prabowo pitch. So specifically, he's talking about, you know, he makes all these promises about no kid is going to grow up malnourished, and we're going to have free food programs for the poor, and we're going to train more science graduates and all this sort of stuff. But the overall message is, if you like the way things are going, I'm the candidate who's going to keep it going in that way. So it's put Ganjar in a really tough position because, you know, he is the same party as the sitting president, but he clearly isn't being endorsed by him. The only candidate who is sort of saying he's going to shake things up is Anies Baswedan. He's been quite critical of the direction of Jokowi's Indonesia. One of the big things he says he will review is the new capital city. That's a very expensive project being built in East Kalimantan. But as I said, Prabowo is likely to win, and because of this, you shouldn't expect much in the way of substantial change. The critics, though, they say, Bev, that democracy in Indonesia has been kind of slowly going down the gurgler for the past 10 years under Joko Widodo, and given that Prabowo Subianto, when he lost the last election, he wouldn't accept the results, his supporters rioted on the streets, he doesn't have a very strong track record of being a bloke who's super committed to democracy, and so this too has been raised as a concern. What will he do if he is elected?
Good to talk, Bill. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
The Productivity Commission has found governments across Australia are failing Indigenous communities with their closing the gap policies by taking a business-as-usual approach. In its scathing assessment, it's called on governments to relinquish power and share it with Indigenous-run organisations to achieve real change.
Across health, education and housing, Aboriginal-run organisations are delivering services every day under the Closing the Gap agreement. Now a damning report is criticising government for not keeping its end of the deal.
The majority of funding relating to services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people actually doesn't go to the community-controlled sector. It goes to the NGO sector, which is not us.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations have told the Productivity Commission review of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap it's not working.
The intention was that governments would work with the Aboriginal community-controlled sector, acknowledging that they were underfunded compared to their non-Indigenous counterparts, and that has not yet happened across the entire agreement.
Closing the Gap is 15 years old. But in 2020, governments signed up to a radical overhaul, promising to share power with Indigenous-run organisations. Today's report says governments are unwilling to relinquish control and aren't revealing where and what it's spending money on.
What we need to do is hold Indigenous organisations responsible for the money that the taxpayer is giving them and stop turning a blind eye to make sure that money is being well spent.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations are already audited. There are really, really strong controls in place.
The Productivity Commission spent 3 years looking into the effectiveness of the 2020 agreement. What was prevalent in the submissions was tension over money.
Yes, we did see examples where funding was given to external bodies outside of the Aboriginal community-controlled sector.
A message noted by the nation's leader.
We'll continue to put forward practical measures in order to close the gap, and we'll be making our statements when the Closing the Gap report is tabled shortly.
Carly Williams, ABC News.
Victoria Police and Emergency Services have now widened their search for a woman who disappeared while going on a run on Sunday. The focus had initially been on bushland near Samantha Murphy's home in Ballarat East, but areas further south in Mount Helen have now also become part of the search zone. Today there was some hope when items were found in the bush, but police have now discounted them.
Cars gathering outside the home of Samantha Murphy 4 days since she vanished.
We're holding up. It's scary that we're getting onto another day.
As the search for the mother of 3 continues, her community, many who have joined the search efforts,
I've been looking since Sunday and I still have not stopped.
Remain hopeful she'll be found alive. Her friend Paula Heenan is at a loss.
It's absolutely surreal. We just can't actually fathom what might have happened or how it happened, how somebody can just disappear.
Samantha is a wife. She's a mum, she's a next door neighbour, she's a friend, she's part of our community through the arts area.
Ms Murphy was last seen leaving her home on Eureka Street in Ballarat East on Sunday morning to go for a run in the nearby Wawukarung Regional Park. Police believe this grainy figure on a neighbour's CCTV camera is Ms Murphy heading out on her run. They're appealing for more vision or any clues which could help locate the woman.
Anything small in nature is still worthy of reporting.
Her husband Mick seen in his car in the search area today. Police say Samantha's disappearance is out of character, but at this stage have not ruled it as suspicious. This afternoon the search was expanded to the Mount Helen area, but it was close to the family home where a patch of bushland was cordoned off after items were found at the base of a tree. Items found today during the search for Samantha Murphy have been assessed by police and are found to be not relevant to the investigation. The search is expected to begin again tomorrow at first light, when police, SES and CFA and a legion of community members will again scour the area.
Turning out in such significant numbers, I think it does come at the heartstrings when we're talking about a mum of young kids, and we just want her to be found safe.
As Samantha's family face a 4th night without her. Laura Mayers, ABC News, Ballarat.
Tasmania's Health Department has received 4 more anonymous complaints relating to patient deaths at the Launceston General Hospital not being reported to the coroner. The Health Department says the complaints support the allegations made in yesterday's parliamentary inquiry, and the Secretary is now calling on concerned members of the public to come forward.
Only months after the Commission of Inquiry delivered its findings, there are calls for another investigation into the Launceston General Hospital.
There must be an independent investigation from the Department of Health to look into these very serious matters.
It's been triggered by allegations aired at the Parliament's ramping inquiry by nurses Tom Millen and Amanda Duncan that some deaths at the LGH weren't reported to the coroner.
Dr Renshaw had a reputation for amending medical certificates of death.
In a hospital environment, a death needs to be reported to the coroner if it's unexpected and occurs during or after a medical procedure, and there's a chance the procedure caused it. The nurses claim there are multiple cases where this didn't happen. It's not the first time this issue has been raised. The ABC aired 2 stories in 2021, where staff and family members spoke out about deaths not being investigated by the coroner.
We just want answers as to why it was all ripped away so quickly.
And coroner Simon Cooper has also previously criticised the LGH for not reporting deaths that ended up being referred to him by the Health Complaints Commissioner, writing in one case that it was apparent from the man's medical records that whether his death should be reported was discussed by various medical practitioners at the LGH. And Mr Cooper was of the view that the man's death was entirely avoidable. He died because of poor medical treatment. Mr Cooper also found the cause of death listed on the man's death certificate was wrong.
The ANMF have been made aware in the past of patient deaths that members felt should have been a coroner's case.
The Nursing and Midwifery Union says it's provided advice to members about how to contact the coroner's office themselves. Now they want the allegations investigated.
There absolutely needs to be a full investigation.
Tasmania's Health Secretary is appealing to the community to report any death of a patient at the LGH that they believe should have been reported to the coroner. An independent expert will review the deaths, and there'll also be a review of death reporting procedures in the state's public hospitals. Lucy MacDonald, ABC News.
Mental health education is becoming a staple in school curriculum starting from a young age, rolling out across all schools in the Northern Territory. The BU program hopes to normalise talking about mental health and equip schools with healthy coping mechanisms. Delivered by Beyond Blue, Headspace and Early Childhood Australia, the initiative has already made an impact in some Territory schools.
At Ludmilla Primary School in Darwin, sharing your emotions is first on the classroom agenda.
If I'd done it when I first walked in, I might have been, yeah.
It was one of the first schools to implement the BU initiative, which strips things back to basics.
How to even be a good friend, how to stand up to a bully, how to reach out and ask for help when you're not feeling well.
The program educates teachers on how to recognise the signs of poor mental health and what they can do to help.
The initiative really supports educators to increase their mental health and wellbeing knowledge and gives them some practical tools and some skills to be able to support children and young people within their schools and early learning services.
The framework is catered to fit the unique needs of each school. Ludmilla have engaged leaders from the local Aboriginal community, Bagot, to start a walking school bus and school attendance program, creating a culturally safe environment for students.
They've got a good relationship with the teachers here and with us workers on the community, and they very feel safe about talking about any problems that they have.
Liz picked the school specifically for its wellbeing framework.
Love you. Have a great day at school. Love you too.
And she's witnessed positive impacts on her kids.
There's emotional resilience, there's physical health, mental health, enhanced self-confidence, self-esteem, social skills.
The program is being rolled out in every school across the Northern Territory, with Ludmilla Primary the star pupil. They say the results speak for themselves.
Teacher satisfaction And I believe it is because of the emphasis through BU and Beyond Blue that we place on well-being of our staff, our students and our community.
Happy students, happy teachers, happy school. Isabella Tolhurst, ABC News, Darwin.
Well, more than 20 world leaders will be spotted in Germany next week, but not for a global summit. The town of Cologne will hold its annual parade with caricatures of political figures. One depicts Ukraine's president alongside a twist on a Shakespeare quote, "To be or NATO be." And some of the world leaders have wooden planks nailed to their heads.
We are seeing more and more people who are powerful in this world who have a plank in front of their head. And in this respect, unfortunately, these are the planks that are currently shaping our lives.
Super Netball's newest franchise, the Melbourne Mavericks, have set themselves bold ambitions for their debut season. The club already has its sights set on playing finals, despite only coming together for the first time today.
Welcome to the Mavericks, a new chapter in Australian netball.
We've got everything to prove and nothing to lose.
It's a fun and relaxed vibe at the team's new home in Melbourne's outer suburbs. But head coach Tracy Neville has only had the entire squad for 3 days.
If you're one of them coaches who just wants to get the hands on the players, I think that was something I really struggled with.
Netball's bitter pay dispute between the players and its governing body meant contracts couldn't be signed until December, 3 months after the club was first launched.
And that non-contact with the players was quite difficult for a new coach coming in.
It was a really challenging time. I mean, I moved my life from Sydney to Melbourne having not signed a contract in any way.
With no form guide to rely on, Neville is heading into the unknown. But the former England Roses coach says reaching finals is not far-fetched.
I do like to win. Always say finals is every coach's ultimate dream.
After 7 years with the Giants, the idea of starting a new club lured Amy Parmenter from Sydney to Melbourne.
I feel like it's pretty special to be able to come to Melbourne and automatically have 9 new friends, and everyone's just really trying to, speed up that process of becoming really close and trusting each other.
Building trust will have to happen quickly. The Mavericks' debut is just 2 months away. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
A-League records goal scorer Michelle Heyman has been selected in the Matildas squad for a crucial Olympic qualifier to replace Sam Kerr. Heyman comes into the Matildas squad for 2 games against Uzbekistan at the end of the month, which the Matildas need to win to secure an Olympic berth. The 36-year-old Canberra United striker has scored 10 goals this season to become the first woman in the A-League to score 100 goals. Heyman hasn't played for the Matildas for 6 years, during which she took a year out of the game for mental health reasons. Former Australian cricket captain Ricky Ponting says he's taken on a coaching role in the T20 Major Cricket League so he can be a part of the sport's growth in the United States. Ponting has been appointed coach of the Washington Freedom for the 2nd edition of the competition. The league will follow the Men's T20 World Cup, which will be held in the US and the Caribbean. Ponting believes the Major Cricket League will help the sport's bid to crack the American market.
I'd heard a lot about it, heard a lot of great things about it, and I think it's just the tip of the iceberg was where cricket potentially heads in the US, so I just felt it was a really good opportunity for me to get involved now.
The ACT government has decided to build a new stadium in the nation's capital rather than renovating the current facility. It'll be built near the Australian Institute of Sport and should lead to fewer disruptions for the Canberra Raiders and ACT Brumbies.
Home to the Raiders and the Brumbies, a partial or complete rebuild of Canberra Stadium would cause headaches.
Relocating teams for several years potentially, and most likely to Manuka Oval.
To avoid that, the Chief Minister wants to build a completely new stadium in Bruce, preferably closer to the busy Hayden Drive transport corridor.
By 2033 is the timeline that we're working on.
Meanwhile, with growing demand for a large central facility for multicultural and other events, $4.6 million will go towards refurbishing Fitzroy Pavilion at Exhibition Park, while design work is completed for a new purpose-built facility at the site. But multicultural community advocates who argued for the new facility say it's a broken promise.
He made the promise 4 years ago to finish the facility in this term of the government, and he's making a promise to finish the next term of the government, and next time he may not be there. So somebody else will come, oh, I didn't make that promise.
The government insists it will fulfil its commitment with necessary upgrades at ageing Epic.
Rather than waiting for 4 years for something, we're giving something this year and then looking to expand upon it in the years ahead. So it's delivering both, but it has to be a renewal of Epic.
Design work will also be funded for a new convention centre on the old Civic Pool site. The opposition still thinks it's Civic that should house the stadium.
There is a reason why many cities around the world have located their stadium in the city in terms of the broader economic benefits as well as attracting tourists.
It doesn't fit in Civic. I'm sorry it doesn't, but it doesn't. And so, faced with that fact, we move on.
Much hinges on a review into whether the AIS has a future in Canberra, which the ABC understands the federal government has received and is now considering. Harry Frost, ABC News, Canberra.
Tonight's top stories on the world. More details emerge of a Hamas proposed three-stage ceasefire, which the US says it will discuss with Israel. A US appeals court rules Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity, meaning he can be prosecuted on charges of plotting to overturn his 2020 election defeat. And bomb blasts near two political offices have killed at least 24 people just a day out from Pakistan's election. And that's the shape of your world for tonight. You can watch the show on iView and head to our YouTube channel for more news and interviews. I'm Bev O'Connor. See you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.